At our big family Christmas, I cleaned the house, paid the caterer, and even decorated for the kids' gift exchange right before dinner. My sister snickered and said, "Funny how you think any of this makes you one of us." My mom just kept serving the turkey. My stepfather didn't even look up. I laughed quietly, then walked out the front door and took back everything that had my name on it. I, 32M, thought I'd finally found my place in this family after 15 years of trying. Boy, was I wrong. The morning started like every other Christmas for the past decade. Me arriving at Mom's house at 7 a.m. with my car loaded down with decorations, groceries, and enough determination to make Norman Rockwell weep. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, which meant I'd beaten everyone else there by at least 3 hours. Perfect. More time to set up the magic that nobody would acknowledge came from me. I'd been doing this dance since I was 17, when Mom married my stepfather, and suddenly I had 3 new siblings who made it crystal clear I wasn't welcome in their perfect little unit. But I kept showing up, kept trying, kept hoping that maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year they'd see me as family instead of the outsider who happened to share DNA with their stepmother. The key still worked, thankfully. I'd half expected them to change the locks after last year's awkwardness when my sister made that comment about how I was trying too hard to belong. But here I was again, arms full of garland and twinkling lights, ready to transform their house into a Christmas wonderland they'd never bother creating themselves. The living room looked exactly like it had in November, sparse, cold, functional. No tree, no decorations, no hint that Christmas was supposed to happen here in 8 hours. I'd learned years ago not to expect them to prepare anything. That was my job, apparently. The family doormat who showed up early and stayed late, cleaning up after people who barely tolerated my existence. I started with the tree, a 7-foot Fraser fir I'd picked out and paid for myself. It took me an hour to get it positioned just right in the corner where it would catch the morning light. Then came the lights, hundreds of them, each strand carefully tested before I'd left my apartment. I'd learned that lesson the hard way 3 Christmases ago when half the tree went dark during dinner and nobody bothered to help me fix it. The ornaments came next. Most of them were mine, collected over the years because nobody else seemed to care about building traditions. There were a few family heirlooms mixed in, the ones Mom had given me permission to use after I'd asked every year for a decade. I handled each one like it might shatter, because in this house, everything felt fragile, including my place in it. By 10 a.m., I had the living room transformed. Garland draped the mantel, stockings hung in a perfect row, and the tree sparkled like something from a magazine. The dining room was next, centerpieces I'd made myself, candles that cost more than I wanted to admit, and place settings for 12 people, even though I knew at least 3 of them would spend the meal making subtle digs about my presence. The kitchen was where the real work happened. I'd hired a caterer, my treat, of course, but that didn't mean I could relax. Someone had to coordinate everything, make sure the timing worked, handle the last-minute details that would inevitably crop up. The turkey was already in the oven, filling the house with that perfect Christmas smell that would make everyone forget who'd made it all possible. My phone buzzed around 11. A text from my sister asking if I needed help. I almost laughed. She'd been asking that same question for years, always timing it perfectly for when 90% of the work was already done. I texted back that everything was under control, which was true, and that she should just focus on getting ready, which was what she'd do anyway. The kids' gift exchange was my favorite part, honestly. I'd spent weeks finding the perfect presents for each of my nieces and nephews, wrapping them in paper that coordinated with the decorations, making sure each child would have something special to remember. It was the one part of Christmas where I felt genuinely useful, where my efforts translated into pure joy on little faces that didn't yet understand the complicated dynamics of blended families. I was arranging the gifts under the tree when I heard the first car in the driveway. Showtime. I checked my watch, noon exactly. They were nothing if not predictable. I smoothed my sweater, took a deep breath, and prepared to smile my way through another performance of family togetherness. My stepfather came through the door first, barely glancing at the transformed living room before heading straight for his recliner. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the hours I'd spent making his house look like Christmas had exploded in all the best ways. Just a grunt and the sound of the TV clicking on to some football game. Mom followed, arms full of the side dishes she'd promised to bring. She paused in the doorway, taking in the decorations with what might have been appreciation or might have been resignation. It was hard to tell with her anymore. She'd gotten good at keeping her expressions neutral when it came to the tension between her biological son and the family she'd chosen to prioritize. She asked if I needed help in the kitchen, and I told her I had everything handled, which was true, but also beside the point. The offer was perfunctory, made because it was expected, not because she actually wanted to roll up her sleeves and work alongside me. We both knew the script by now. The siblings arrived in a cluster, my sister with her husband and 2 kids, my stepbrothers with their wives and children. The house filled with noise and laughter, and the kind of easy familiarity that I'd been watching from the outside for 15 years. They hugged Mom, clapped my stepfather on the back, ruffled the kids' hair, and settled into the comfortable rhythms of people who belonged. I got nods, polite smiles. "Thanks for setting everything up," they said, the same way you'd thank a caterer or a housekeeper. Appreciated but not included. Useful but not family. The afternoon passed in its predictable pattern. I floated between the kitchen and the living room, making sure drinks stayed filled and appetizers stayed stocked, while everyone else relaxed into the holiday. The kids played with toys that had been scattered across my carefully arranged decorations. The adults caught up on gossip and shared inside jokes that predated my existence in their lives. I found myself watching them sometimes, trying to figure out what I was missing. What secret code I hadn't cracked that would finally earn me a place at their table instead of just a seat. They made it look so effortless, this belonging thing. Like they'd been born knowing how to be family, while I was still fumbling with the instruction manual. The caterer arrived at 4, right on schedule. I helped them set up in the kitchen, coordinating the timing so everything would be perfect. The turkey was golden and magnificent, the sides were restaurant quality, and the desserts looked like they belonged in a bakery window. It was going to be the kind of meal people remembered, the kind that made Christmas feel special. I was arranging the final garnishes when my sister wandered into the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, watching me work with an expression I couldn't quite read. We made small talk about the food, about how good everything looked, about how the kids were excited for presents. Then she said something about how I'd really outdone myself this year, how the house looked amazing. For a second, I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment when someone finally acknowledged not just the work, but the love behind it. Maybe this was when I stopped being the helpful outsider and became family. I should have known better. Dinner was called at 6, and everyone gathered around the table I'd set with Mom's good china and the centerpieces I'd spent hours perfecting. The lighting was warm and golden, the food was spectacular, and for a few minutes, it felt like the Christmas I'd been trying to create for 15 years. My stepfather carved the turkey with the precision of someone who'd done it countless times before. Mom bustled around, making sure everyone had what they needed. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable chaos of a big family meal. I sat in my usual spot, not quite at the head of the table, not quite relegated to the kids' end, but somewhere in that middle space that perfectly captured my position in this family. Close enough to participate, far enough away to remember I was different. The kids were telling stories about school, about friends, about the presents they hoped Santa had brought. The adults were sharing work gossip and vacation plans and all the mundane details that make up a life shared with people who care about you. It was warm and lovely and everything I'd wanted to be part of for so long. That's when my sister decided to remind me why I'd never quite fit. She was laughing at something one of the kids had said, her face flushed with wine and good humor, when she looked across the table at me. Her expression shifted slightly, like she'd just remembered something unpleasant, and she got that particular smile she wore when she was about to say something cutting disguised as a joke. She told me it was funny how I thought any of this made me one of them. The words hit like a physical blow. Not because they were surprising. I'd heard variations of this sentiment for years, but because of the timing. Because she'd waited until I was surrounded by the evidence of my efforts, until I was sitting in the middle of the Christmas I'd created, to remind me that none of it mattered. The table went quiet for a heartbeat. Not the shocked silence of people witnessing something terrible, but the uncomfortable pause of people who'd heard this song before and weren't sure whether to pretend they hadn't or to change the subject quickly. Mom kept serving the turkey. Her hands never paused, never trembled, never showed any sign that her son had just been verbally slapped at the Christmas table. She just kept carving and plating and passing dishes like nothing had happened. My stepfather didn't even look up from his plate, didn't defend me, didn't tell his daughter to watch her mouth, didn't acknowledge that anything inappropriate had occurred. He just kept eating, kept chewing, kept existing in the same space where his wife's son was being reminded of his place. I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was screaming or crying or throwing my carefully prepared meal across the room. I laughed quietly, the sound barely audible over the resumed conversation, and I felt something inside me finally break. Not break like shatter, break like a chain snapping, break like a door opening, break like the last thread holding me to this performance finally giving way. I stood up from the table, calmly, quietly, without drama or explanation. I walked to the front door, grabbed my coat from the closet, and stepped out into the cold December air. Behind me, I could hear the conversation continuing. No one called my name. No one asked where I was going. No one seemed to notice that the person who'd made their perfect Christmas possible had just walked away from it. I stood on the front porch for a moment, breathing in the sharp winter air and feeling something I hadn't experienced in 15 years, clarity. Pure, crystalline understanding of exactly what I needed to do. I walked back to my car and started making phone calls. The first call was to the caterer. I explained that there had been a change of plans and I needed them to pack up all the remaining food, the desserts, the leftover sides, everything that hadn't been served yet. I told them I'd pay extra for the inconvenience and asked them to meet me at my apartment in an hour. The second call was to my neighbor, an elderly woman who spent every Christmas alone because her family lived across the country. I asked if she'd like some company for dessert and maybe help me eat enough food to feed an army. The third call was to the homeless shelter where I volunteered sometimes. I asked if they could use some high-quality Christmas desserts and maybe some decorations for their common room. Then I went back inside. The dinner was still in full swing. They'd moved on to dessert, store-bought cookies that someone had grabbed at the last minute because nobody had thought to plan ahead. My absence hadn't even created a ripple in their perfect family evening. I walked through the living room, unplugging the tree lights and carefully removing every ornament that belonged to me. The stockings came down next. All of them mine except for the faded ones Mom had saved from the kids' childhoods. The garland, the centerpieces, the candles, the carefully arranged holiday magic that had transformed their house into something special. My sister looked up from her conversation as I walked past with an armload of decorations. She asked what I was doing, and I told her I was taking back everything that had my name on it. Simple as that. Mom finally spoke up then, asking if I was okay, if something was wrong. I told her I was fine, better than fine actually, and that I hoped they enjoyed the rest of their evening. My stepfather looked up from his dessert long enough to ask if I was having some kind of breakdown. I assured him I wasn't. I was having a breakthrough. It took me 3 trips to get everything loaded into my car. The tree was the hardest part. I had to drag it through the living room and out the front door, leaving a trail of pine needles across their hardwood floors. Nobody offered to help. They just watched, like I was some kind of entertainment they hadn't ordered but weren't quite ready to turn off. The caterer was waiting in the driveway when I finished loading the last box of ornaments. They looked confused but professional, the way people in service industries learn to look when customers do unexpected things. I helped them pack up the remaining food and followed them back to my apartment. My neighbor was delighted to have company. We ate chocolate cake and drank coffee and talked about her grandchildren and my work and everything except the family dinner I'd just walked away from. She told me the decorations looked beautiful in my living room, that my apartment felt more like Christmas than anywhere she'd been all season. The shelter was grateful for the desserts. The night supervisor told me they'd been planning to serve sheet cake from the grocery store, so the fancy pastries I brought felt like a real treat. I helped them arrange some of the decorations in their dining room, and for the first time all day, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. I got home around 10 p.m. to find 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Mom wanted to know if I was okay. My sister wanted to know if I was planning to get over this tantrum in time for New Year's. My stepbrothers wanted to know if I expected them to clean up the pine needles I'd left behind. I deleted all of them without responding. Update 1. The calls kept coming for 3 days. Mom left voicemails that started concerned and gradually shifted to frustrated. She couldn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of what my sister had said. It was just a joke, she insisted. Family teasing. The kind of thing siblings do to each other. I almost called her back to explain that siblings don't do that to each other. Siblings might tease, but they don't systematically exclude. They don't spend 15 years making someone feel like a permanent outsider. They don't wait until Christmas dinner to remind someone they'll never belong. But I didn't call back, because I realized that Mom knew exactly what had been happening all these years. She'd watched it, allowed it, participated in it by her silence. She'd chosen her stepchildren's comfort over her son's dignity so many times that it had become the family's default setting. My sister left one voicemail that was pure poison disguised as concern. She was worried about me, she said. This wasn't like me. I was usually so understanding, so willing to let things go. She hoped I wasn't having some kind of mental health crisis that was making me overreact to harmless family dynamics. I saved that voicemail, not because I wanted to torture myself, but because I wanted to remember exactly how she sounded when she tried to gaslight me into believing that 15 years of systematic exclusion was all in my head. The stepbrothers sent a group text asking if I planned to pay for the carpet cleaning since my dramatic exit had left pine needles ground into Mom's Persian rug. I screenshotted that one too. Evidence of exactly where their priorities lay. Work was a blessing that week. I threw myself into year-end projects and budget planning and all the mundane tasks that kept my mind occupied. My colleagues asked about my Christmas, and I told them it was quiet but nice. Which was true, in its way. The evening with my neighbor had been the nicest Christmas I'd had in years. New Year's Eve came and went without any invitations from the family. Not that I expected any, but the silence was telling. They were perfectly capable of celebrating without me, had probably been doing it psychologically for years. My physical absence just made it official. Update 2. January brought an unexpected visitor. Mom showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, looking older than I remembered and carrying a casserole dish like a peace offering. She asked if we could talk, and I let her in because I'm not cruel, just done. She sat on my couch, the same couch where I'd spent Christmas evening with my neighbor, eating cake and feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months, and tried to explain herself. She loved me, she said. I was her son, her firstborn, and nothing would ever change that. But I had to understand how hard it had been for her, trying to blend two families, trying to make everyone feel included. I asked her if she thought I'd felt included over the past 15 years. She got quiet then, staring at her hands, and I could see her trying to rewrite history in real time, looking for moments of inclusion to balance out the years of being treated like a guest in my own family. She told me my sister felt terrible about what she'd said at Christmas. It had come out wrong, she insisted. My sister had been drinking, and she'd meant it as a joke, and she never intended to hurt my feelings. She wanted to apologize, to make things right. I told Mom that my sister was 34 years old and perfectly capable of apologizing for herself if she actually wanted to. The fact that she'd sent our mother to do it instead told me everything I needed to know about how sorry she really was. Mom asked what it would take to fix this. What did I want from them? How could we move forward as a family? I told her I wanted exactly what I'd been wanting for 15 years, to be treated like family instead of like a helpful stranger. I wanted my presence to matter as much as my absence. I wanted to be included in conversations instead of just invited to events. I wanted to stop feeling like I had to earn my place at every gathering. She said she understood that things would be different going forward, but I could see in her eyes that she didn't really understand at all. She thought this was about Christmas dinner, about one comment from my sister. She couldn't see the pattern, couldn't acknowledge the years of small cuts that had finally bled me dry. I thanked her for coming, told her I loved her too, and said I needed time to figure out what came next. She left the casserole, tuna noodle, my favorite when I was 12, and promised to call soon. I threw the casserole away after she left, not out of spite, but because I couldn't eat food that came with strings attached. Food that was meant to guilt me back into my old role as the family member who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction without complaint. Update 3. Spring brought clarity. I'd spent the winter in therapy, working through 15 years of accumulated hurt and confusion with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced had a name: scapegoating. I'd been assigned the role of the family outsider, the one who absorbed everyone else's discomfort with the blended family situation. It wasn't conscious or malicious, necessarily, but it was real, and it was damaging, and it had been going on for so long that everyone had forgotten it was a choice rather than a natural law. I started setting boundaries. When Mom called to invite me to Easter dinner, I thanked her and declined. When she asked why, I told her I wasn't ready to return to family gatherings where my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. She got upset then, accused me of punishing everyone for my sister's one mistake. I reminded her that it hadn't been one mistake. It had been 15 years of mistakes, of choosing the path of least resistance instead of standing up for her son. My sister finally called in April. She was pregnant, she announced, and she wanted her child to know their uncle. She hoped we could put this whole thing behind us and move forward as a family. I congratulated her on the pregnancy and told her I hoped she'd raise her child to be kinder than she'd been to me. She got quiet then, and for a moment I thought maybe she was finally going to acknowledge what she'd done, maybe offer a real apology instead of the non-apology Mom had delivered months earlier. Instead, she told me I was being dramatic and holding grudges and making everything about myself. She said the family missed me, but they weren't going to keep begging me to come back if I was determined to play the victim. I hung up on her. Not angrily, not dramatically, just calmly pressed the end call button and went back to my life. The life I'd been building without them was good. Better than good, actually. I'd started hosting my own gatherings, game nights with colleagues, dinner parties with neighbors, holiday celebrations with the chosen family. I'd been assembling without realizing it. People who appreciated my efforts, who reciprocated my care, who made me feel like I belonged because I did belong. I kept the decorations I'd rescued from Christmas. They looked beautiful in my apartment, and every time I saw them, I remembered not the family dinner that had finally broken me, but the evening I'd spent with my neighbor, eating cake and feeling genuinely happy. That was the real gift I'd given myself that Christmas. Permission to stop trying to fit into a space that had never been meant for me, and to start creating spaces where I actually belonged. 1. The family still calls sometimes. Mom with updates about everyone's lives, delivered like news from a foreign country. My sister with announcements about milestones I'm expected to celebrate from a distance. The stepbrothers with requests for help or advice, as if nothing had changed. I'm polite but distant. I wish them well, but I don't wish to be part of their story anymore. I've got my own story now, and it's a much better one. Sometimes I wonder if they understand what they lost when they spent 15 years teaching me I didn't belong. But mostly, I don't think about them at all. I'm too busy living the life I should have been living all along, surrounded by people who see me, value me, and never make me question whether I deserve a place at their table. Because I do deserve that place. I always did. It just took me 32 years and one perfect Christmas disaster to figure it out.